Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer, and with me is the lovely Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor. So today's topic is titled Riding Hacks. How do we hack our own bodies? How do we hack the system to improve our balance when we don't have mirrors or videos or we can't see what we're doing? And we'll talk a little bit about even how our nervous system is not the best guidance. Our brains are not the best guiding system to improve our balance. So we have today ideas from Deb, who specializes in the human body, and ideas that I have from working with horses and riders on things that we can do by ourselves to improve our balance as riders and basically overcome old habits, develop new habits that are more efficient, more useful, more balanced, that kind of thing. So I thought we would start our list of tips. What do we call them? It's just different things we can work on by ourselves on our horses without mirrors, without visual feedback. So what do you have at the top of your list, Deb?
I think I want to play off of our last podcast. I think what's really important is the connection of the pelvis to the torso. So always checking in, making sure that your legs are just hanging off of your torso, that you're not tensing your legs or locking your joints. You know, making sure like I said from the last podcast, I'm always asking myself, are all my joints open and available? My elbows, my wrists, my yes joint in my head, my knees, everything, that I'm not locking them down, because then I won't be able to listen to what the horse is telling me. That blocks off the proprioceptors from getting information to the brain. So that's
the
a big one.
Tension.
Yeah, the excess tension of locking and holding.
It's also, if we restrict our joints muscularly, we lose our one of our shock absorbers of the body.
Good point. Totally agree. And otherwise, I was just reading an article online about this, and I see lots of riders posting how their spine hurts or their back hurts or they have back problems. So if we're constantly locking our other joints, our spine is going to have to be the shock absorber.
Right. All of the intervertebral.
Yeah. Yeah. And they are not meant to do that. That's what all the other joints are for.
So you're saying just start by sort of visualizing our pelvis as part of the spine and the head system, as part of the axial skeleton, and mentally separate the legs from the pelvis.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I play this game all the time because my horses, and maybe this is a logistics problem on my end, when I'm going into the arena, they inevitably try to rub me onto a post or the gate.
Of course they do.
I'm like, really? So can you bend your knee way up, like almost to a jockey position, without falling off or without
tilting?
Yeah, that tells me that, you're definitely have your pelvis connected to your torso. If you don't, you're going to tend to sway and fall.
So that would be the feedback. Can you move your legs independently of your seat bones? That's sort of how we can check ourselves to see if we're mentally connecting our pelvis to our legs or mentally connecting our pelvis to our torso.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And that kind of goes hand in hand with my number one thing I tell riders: no matter the saddle or even the design of the saddle, can we feel like we're standing in a standing alignment over the horse rather than a sitting? Because we're told, we talk about sitting on a horse, sitting in the saddle. We use the term sitting a lot, and it can kind of lead people into literally a sitting position, back on the pockets, with the
Right.
torso and the spine behind a vertical and the legs stuck out in front. So there's no way we can be in a truly a sitting position and have our legs free and available and underneath us.
Exactly. And that's
So,
usually if you're sitting on your pockets, you're engaging your psoas to hold you up.
right.
Yeah.
Whereas if you, and you can sort of soften your eyes or even close your eyes momentarily if it's safe. And instead of trying to sit in the saddle or sit on the horse, it's far more useful to think I'm standing over the horse and I'm connected to gravity. So our body alignment is much more important to align to gravity than it is to the middle of the saddle or even the middle of the horse, because
Right.
the horse is a moving, unpredictable force. And the saddle will go with the back of the horse with the movement. So when we find a standing alignment versus a sitting in the saddle, we automatically sort of come forward, bring our head over our pelvis, straighten our spine a little bit, and our legs will come more underneath us.
Yes. And you can even do that standing on the ground, just asking yourself, where am I standing on my feet? Am I more back on my heels? Am I too far forward? That doesn't happen very often. Most people stand back on their heels and lock their knees to be stationary. So what you're doing on the ground, you're doing on the horse too.
I would say that's true with a lot of riders. They're leaning on the cantle of the saddle
Yes.
for support, which actually makes you very unstable, because if we lean into the back of the saddle, when the horse moves, especially if they lose balance, the back muscles are going to shift the saddle side to side or more to one side than the other. And we're at the mercy of that force if we're leaning into the saddle for our stability. So coming up into a standing position it feels more like a sailor getting his sea legs. Like
Yes.
we can adjust over gravity despite these forces of motion that are the horse, which is like the waves of the ocean. It's like, no, we can balance over that. But if we're sitting, we're really putting our bodies at the mercy of those forces of motion instead of learning to adapt over them and maintain our own stability. So standing, to me, to feel like we're standing, even though we're in the saddle with stirrups, that sensation of standing versus sitting, I think is primary to finding our balance.
I agree. And we do it when we're sitting in a chair too. It's we're on the pocket. So it's everywhere, on the horse, on the ground.
Right. And people will ask me a lot about like a 2-point position for jumping or racing, where you can't be really in a standing alignment with gravity. And I go, it's sort of the same. Like we still have to be straight between our skull, spine, and seat bones, but we're crouched. So it's the equivalent of doing a squat.
I
Like
agree.
if
Yeah.
you do a squat, you're still balanced and you're
A
still
healthy squat.
straight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to me, it's just using your hip angle, actually flexing where you're supposed to flex at the hip joint.
Right. The hip, knee, and ankle all do the work of
Yeah.
flexing and extending, but the torso is still aligned and stable.
Yes.
So either standing or crouching, but even in a 2-point, you can get the sensation that you're over the movement, not on the movement.
Oh, I like that.
And that has saved my ass more times than I can count on a runaway horse. It's like you just get up over the movement. And that's the purpose of 2-point, is you have huge forces to deal with at high speeds and over big fences. So using the leg joints as shock absorbers and getting your torso off of that force of the saddle helps us stay stable. So on a runaway horse, it's a great position to take because you can stay stable and be able to get the horse to slow down or at least direct the movement and stay safe.
Yeah, I like that. Makes sense.
Yeah. So that sensation of looking, whether we're upright, standing, or sort of squatting and crouched, we want to separate our bodies from the horse's movement. Right.
That's
And we're sort of
interesting.
taught to ride the middle of the saddle or ride the middle of the horse. And in our brains, that ties us into the movement. Where I find it's much more useful, what professional riders do is they find their body's balance over gravity. And that's how a professional rider can adapt to lots of different saddles and lots of different horses' movement.
And that's really powerful, because that's that misconception of move with the horse.
Right. Right.
That's a
And
big
I go,
topic.
well, if that
Not so
really,
much.
if that kind of worked with the laws of physics, then we,
Right.
we would do that in a boat. But it's like, we don't do that in a boat. We do the
No.
opposite of that, right? Because if the boat gets hit by a wave on the left, if we just go to the right where the force is going, we capsize.
Right.
Right. So we actually have to counterbalance the forces of motion. We don't go with the horse exactly.
It's kind of
Especially,
counterintuitive. It's kind of like the Alexander technique of getting to that subconscious habit of it all and having to reprogram that subconscious thinking,
yeah,
to be able to do that.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But if we sort of mentally separate our bodies and find our relationship to gravity under the horse, it helps us sense better where our bodies need to be during that force of motion as intuitively as if we were on a boat in the ocean.
Right.
We do that intuitively, or we know we're going to fall off. So the problem is when we ride, if we try to move with the horse, or if, just like you said, if we mentally connect our pelvis to our legs, we function very differently than if we mentally connect our pelvis to our spine. And the same is true with just being on a horse. If we mentally connect our bodies to the horse, we succumb to the forces of motion that are unpredictable.
Very, yeah, I
They're
agree.
unpredictable. And if we separate our bodies from the movement of the horse and we find our balance over gravity, that's a lot like just getting your sea legs. That's what you do on a boat. So that's one of the biggest tips I have for riders working on their own is you can find that, let's say if you ride with a long stirrup, you can find that standing position over and over and over and over, just like you would on a boat, while the forces of motion are sort of pushing and pulling against that stability.
Yeah, would you agree that the saddle kind of goes with the horse and not the rider? Because I think that's another misconception.
It can
Does that
do
make
both.
sense?
It can do both, because people say, oh, my saddle slid to the left, or my saddle is always off to the left. Yeah. And I go, your saddle is an inanimate object. It succumbs.
It doesn't walk and talk.
It doesn't walk and talk. It doesn't move by itself, right? The saddle goes according to forces that are affecting the saddle. So
like
that
that
could be a horse that rolls the barrel out to the right, which means it'll be lower on the top left side of the pack. So it could be the horse that's pulling the saddle down on the left, or it could be an unbalanced rider that's pushing the saddle down to the left. It can be a combination of both, because some horses and some riders, the left to right imbalance matches.
Oh,
that's not great. Right? Because that really exaggerates the problem. And those are typically the people who will say, I keep having to buy a different girth. I keep having to tighten the girth. I keep having to sort of, shift and adjust my saddle back every time I ride because it keeps going off to the left or the right. And that's typically when the horse's pattern of crookedness matches the rider's pattern of crookedness. That saddle has a hard time staying in the middle because forces from above and below are affecting the saddle.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So what else you got for a tip for somebody working on their own? Because I think our first two sort of work in conjunction with each other.
Yeah. Well, there's the one we talked about last time, which was just playing with, which I really like because it can bring up whether you're out of, we have what I call a push leg and a pull leg. This happened to me once. I thought I was hauling horses and I thought, oh, I'll just take this back road. I'll get there much faster. Well, I ended up getting behind a bicycle race.
Oh, right. We talked about that.
I couldn't pass. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with this amount of time? So I started watching these guys and their legs. And it's true. Everybody has like a push leg and a pull leg.
Mm-hmm.
And you
I had never heard of that until we talked about that last time.
And so I really like the game we talked about last time about what happens when I drop one stirrup.
Yes.
And learning how to pick it up and so that just gives you information about, where your push leg is and where your pull leg is. You probably have one leg you grip, or one side you tend to call your Rock of Gibraltar side. Left-handed, right-handed, whatever you want to call it. And that'll just give you information to see, wow, I'm really much more coordinated when I drop this stirrup than when I drop it on the other side. I feel totally uncoordinated.
Yeah, that can really help us kind of figure out some of our own patterns. And that's a bit on my list too, in that when somebody drops one stirrup, you can really compare what's the angle, how much muscle tension do I feel increase or decrease in the other leg, and does one leg feel a lot longer or a lot shorter compared. And I'll even have riders, if they drop both stirrups, the point of dropping both stirrups is to literally find the balance of your torso just on the two knobby little points that we call seat bones, right? So here we are trying to balance our whole pelvis, spine, head, torso on these two unstable ischium, right? Which
little
are
rockers.
Just little
They're
rockers.
Just little rockers.
Yeah. And so we can be on the back of the rockers. We can be too far forward on the rockers, but just like a rocking chair, there's a particular point to the rocker where we actually balance. And if we take that down to surface area, it's not very big. It's like maybe the tip of our thumb is what we're balancing on. So I'll have riders drop both stirrups and sort of rest their arms either on the front of the saddle or on their legs and see if they can find that vertical alignment over gravity standing just by sort of adjusting the central line of the body over those two seat bones. And if we do that on our own, first of all, it should be on a safe horse or have the horse led because you're in a vulnerable place. What's interesting is when people shift from sort of gripping to balancing, the first thing we feel is massively unstable.
Yes.
Right. Massively
Completely
unstable.
Agree.
We feel that sort of, oh my God. And then if you give your hands the saddle to grip instead of the reins, we start to slowly sort of let all of that gripping go out of our arms and legs as we learn the coordination of adjusting constantly over our two little seat bones. So our two little seat bones are our sea legs, so to speak. Supporting that position supports our vertical alignment with gravity. And invariably, I will typically take the stirrups away from a rider who's really overusing the legs, which I think we talked about last time. You agree is a big problem for a lot of riders. And invariably, after riding around 5 or 10 minutes without stirrups, they want their stirrups to go down anywhere from 2 to 6 holes.
Yeah. I think I dropped mine 4. Yeah. I've dropped mine 4 in the last couple of years just by unwinding all of that hunter jumper
tightness of the legs. Yes.
of my legs.
Yes. And it's amazing because it's a little bit when we're actively using our muscle energy to stabilize our torso over our seat bones, gravity will sort of create this stretch like a yoga class by just letting our legs hang off of the horse. Right. And so people's legs just sort of like release all this tension in a very short amount of time. And they literally lengthen through the leg muscles.
Yes.
And so then when they go to take their stirrup back, they're like, oh my God, I feel like a jockey.
Yeah.
Like this feels way too short. Right. And the first thing I have to do, which is also often the case, is some people have been trained to work without stirrups as a way of improving their balance. And people who have done that as a training exercise, invariably, when we drop the stirrups, they actually bend the leg more and still try to put the heel down.
I've seen that.
Yeah. And so I go, no, the balance is up higher in your seat bones on your torso. The legs just need to hang down towards gravity, which ultimately gives us that feeling that they describe in classical riding literature, that our legs should feel like wet towels or noodles against the horse, right?
Yeah, I like that.
But we can't get that sensation if we're gripping inward or upward with our legs, or if we're trying to push our heels down without stirrups. I go, if you don't have stirrups, your toes should hang down. Like that's a soft leg. The stirrup is what bends the joints of the leg. You don't have to try to bend the joints of the leg. When you put your foot in the stirrup, it still should hang down to gravity, but the stirrup has an upward force that puts a bend in the joints, right? So to learn to sort of let the legs hang, you can start with one stirrup at a time and sort of start to notice how we are using our legs, because we don't even know our own habits.
No, we don't.
I mean, by definition, a habit has become an unconscious skill. So we have to like go slow and sort of play these games to even discover what our habits are. So dropping one stirrup at a time really helps us understand how we're using our legs on a regular basis. And then dropping both stirrups at the same time, letting the toes dangle, letting the joints open and extend, really helps us shift to where our primary balance should be, which is the seat bone, spine, and head.
Exactly. And if you have a safe situation, I think it's fun to add, if you've got somebody that can lead your horse, is close your eyes and do that. You get tons more information about what you're doing with your body when you take the visual.
Absolutely. It turns our focus internal instantly.
Instantly, yes.
Instantly. So
and how do we keep that when we're riding? That's the key. How do we keep that internal conversation going on?
Oh, that's easy. No, you use your peripheral vision on purpose.
Yeah, right? I do. It's so when we get into that tunnel vision, it's when we lose sight of what we're doing.
Yeah, because focal vision is for basically assessing something external. Mm-hmm. And peripheral vision is more for sensing something external, or for getting clear on what we're feeling internally. So even that's another tip when we're riding, is if we want to experience how we're managing our own mechanics, how we're using our own body, we can either close our eyes, that's sort of big and instant. If we're riding by ourselves, we can blink slowly and kind of get the same effect.
I've closed my eyes when in a safe, for maybe 4 or 5 steps or something, just to see, am I really hearing what I'm doing, in myself. Yeah.
And if we're in an arena and we're on a safe horse, we can close our eyes for a few strides here and there, or we can blink slowly, or we can purposefully not focus on anything in particular. We can sort of go into what do I see on the sides while my head is still pointed forward, and access our peripheral vision.
Mm-hmm.
And even in Sally Swift's book, she calls that soft eyes.
Right.
It's just accessing the peripheral vision.
Right.
And it really helps us shift our awareness to an internal perspective as opposed to external.
Right. Instead of, seeing what you're doing with your hands or the horse's head, or, we need to be able to feel that stuff instead of
Right.
see it in front of us.
Right.
I think that's another tip is, don't be looking down at your horse's ears or whatever. Bring yourself back into the community, I call it.
Yeah, without necessarily focusing on where you're going, which is why we all turn our heads. So, if our external focus is at the jump, it's easy to lose the feel of the movement of the horse. So ultimately, if we're jumping or racing or doing something that requires our external focus, we also have to keep a part of us sensing and feeling where the horse is underneath us and where gravity is in relationship to our body. So yeah, that's a good tip, is to even play with how we use our vision between focal and peripheral, or closing our eyes to get a sense of where we are over gravity.
Yeah.
And it does help to also, like I said, help us learn to separate our bodies from the movement of the horse's body.
I think that's the big key that I found when I just close my eyes for a few steps. It gives me the information. Am I balancing over the horse, or am I going default to the horse's movement?
Right.
Yeah.
And when we connect ourselves too much to the horse, we grip. I mean, we're basically hanging on to a moving force, just like a newbie sailor is gripping the rail or grabbing a line, finding something to grip for a sense of stability, because we don't have our sea legs yet.
That's key, because I see that in riders balancing off of their hands.
Or stirrups.
If you take away either one of those, they can't, they're trying to find their sea legs again. So
yeah, and I find the only value of riding a horse bareback ever is to get that direct connection with no support. Even if the horse is being led, it's like, wow, if you grip bareback, you fall off fast.
You're dead.
Yeah, you fall off fast, or you stimulate the horse in the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of a good exercise. It's not great for the horse, so I don't do a lot of bareback riding or recommend it, but for short periods of time, as a way to kind of wake up our senses and play with our balance. That's another tip, is to either ride the horse bareback, if safe to do so, or have somebody lead you around while you're bareback. And the one thing we can do bareback to find our stability while we're learning our balance is grip the mane. We can grip the mane and it won't affect the horse negatively. And it sort of satisfies our instinct of gripping when we get a little bit unstable. But it doesn't have a negative effect on the horse or our bodies if we use our hands to grip mane when we feel a little unstable. And that's true whether you're in the saddle or bareback, but it's the only thing you have if you're bareback.
That's true.
Yeah. But sometimes because what a saddle does is it muffles the feel of the horse a little bit. It distributes our body weight over a greater surface area. So saddles are as good for the horse as they are for the rider, but it also has a muffling effect between our bodies and the horse's movement.
Sometimes it's almost too much information when you ride bareback.
It's a lot of information.
You can get really overwhelmed, like, whoa, okay, I don't know what to do with all that.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And different saddles sort of have a muffling effect, just like boats. Like a big, heavy Western saddle is going to be like being in a yacht, where, a racing saddle feels like you're in a dinghy.
Yeah.
And, a jumping saddle is maybe like a light sailboat, and a dressage Saddle is maybe more like a not quite a yacht, but in that direction. So that's the only difference is, and just like a boat, the saddle is an inanimate object that succumbs to the forces of motion.
Right.
That's all it is. But when we ride bareback, we start to feel it is possible to get our sea legs, no matter the conditions of the movement. Right? Might not be easy, but it's possible.
A lot of information.
Yes. So the other thing I had on my list, which is it ties into everything we've been talking about. But even if we never drop one stirrup or both stirrups, one of the things I've used myself, well, two things, is from the saddle. If I'm truly vertical in alignment with gravity through my skull, spine, and seat bones, then my legs will automatically come underneath my pelvis.
Yes, they will.
Right? If I think I'm straight, but I'm a little bit leaning back behind the vertical alignment of gravity, then when I look down at my own legs, I'm going to see my own toes. And if I can see my toes from the saddle, I know my legs are too far forward.
That's a good one.
They're out in front of me. So that's a very simple thing we can do while we ride. So from the saddle, I should just look down and only see the tops of my thighs to my knee and then nothing else.
I agree.
So it looks like my lower legs aren't there. I feel them there, but they're underneath me. So if I can see my toes, I know my torso is leaning back. Some people will go to adjust the leg back, but not the torso. And I go, if every time you bring the torso
Good
backwards, if you rock backwards on your seat bones, you can even feel it in a chair. If you rock backwards towards your pockets, your legs shoot out in front of you.
And then they tense.
Right.
Because it's the only way you can stay upright.
Right. And if you get too far forward, we all have that sensation of falling, right? Mm-hmm. Or we don't want to be on our crotch. So we don't, there's a certain limit to going forward that's still comfortable. Exactly. But I go somewhere between, landing on your crotch and sitting on your pockets. There's a place where your legs will just spontaneously, not because you put your legs there, but the legs will just gravitate into a position underneath the torso because of the torso balance, where I see a lot of riders trying to constantly shove their legs backwards. It's like you're fighting your own legs if your torso is too far back towards the pockets.
There was a study done, alexandertechniquescience.com, on the where the pelvis is in relationship to the feet, and that center of mass to function properly has to be over your feet.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what balance is, whether we're in a crouched position like a squat or if we're in a standing position. And even sitting in a chair, the chair can kind of hold us up, but it's not really a self-contained balance.
Right. Yeah. And the only other thing I have to add to that, and I have to use this constantly because I find myself bracing against my stirrup instead of just allowing my foot to rest there, is to soften the backs of the knees, not the front of the knees, but thinking about, and you can even take your hand and put it in the back of your knee and say, is that open and soft back there?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's actually closer to the knee joint.
Right, than the front. The front is, there's too much we associate with the front of our knees, but the back, keeping the back of the knee soft.
Yeah, and again, that's part of bringing the legs back underneath you.
Yes.
As we adjust the alignment of our torso, the legs should soften and kind of come under the seat as a result.
Yes.
And that's part of how, instead of adjusting the legs, it's part of how I find my vertical alignment with gravity in different saddles on different horses, is by sort of that feeling of, I'm on the right place on my seat bones because my legs sort of spontaneously shifted underneath me.
And that's a good point. I tell clients this all the time. It's kind of like get on a different saddle and see where your
Right.
balance is. Or I'll tell people that don't ride, go put on somebody else's shoes.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Because then it heightens your awareness, because we get into that mental habitual groove of same horse, same saddle.
Yes.
But if you get on a different horse or just a different saddle, you're going to get all sorts of new information about how you're using your body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing too, when we look down and we can't see our toes, I'm going to circle back to this whole saddle shifting left and right and need a tighter girth deal. One of the things I used all the time, because all of us are left-handed or right-handed, all of us use ourselves asymmetrically as a habit. We all do it. There's no getting away from it, and horses do it too. So it's such a strong habit in our nervous system that it's very hard for us to correct, because what feels straight to us is typically asymmetrical, left to right. So once I look down and I don't see my toes and I can see the tops of my thighs from the saddle, I can also compare one thigh bone to the other thigh bone. And if I'm crooked through my spine or my torso, or even if the horse is crooked and the saddle's going to go off left and right, my thigh bones will not look equal to each other.
What do you mean they don't look equal?
So if I'm crooked and I'm one-sided, one thigh bone is going to be either closer to me upward, where the other one looks longer and downward, or one is going to be farther forward towards the front of the saddle, and the other one will be farther back.
Okay.
Right. And it's that same thing we encounter all the time. Somebody will get on a crooked horse and they'll go, oh, my stirrups are uneven.
I know.
Right. And I'll check the stirrups and I'll count the holes and I go, nope, your stirrups are perfectly even, which is why I like the reinforced stirrup leathers that don't stretch.
That don't stretch, yeah.
They don't stretch. And I go, nope, your stirrups are even. So if you feel the unevenness of your stirrups, then either the horse is really crooked or you're really crooked or both.
Or take your, yeah.
Right. And sometimes it is the horse. Sometimes the horse is sort of cocking a hind leg and rolling the back significantly and pulling the saddle to the low side with it, making that low side stirrup feel about 3 holes longer than the short side stirrup. So if we count the holes and we know whether we created the problem or the horse sort of created the problem, it doesn't really matter. Either way, to get our balance, we have to make our own thigh bones equal and symmetrical to each other, which means we're also making our seat bones level and equal to each other. So if the horse loses balance, it's sort of like a big wave of force that can knock us to the left or the right. We have to resist that force. If we succumb to that force, let's say a big wave of force comes to the left, it's going to suddenly make our right seat bone lower and our right leg longer. And we'll clinch with our glutes on the left, tighten our little butt cheeks, and we'll hike our leg up and tighten our leg on the left. Right. So if we just rebalance our bones, we make our seat bones equal to each other. We make our thigh bones symmetrical to each other. Then we start to be able to really feel what's coming from us and what's coming from the horse.
Yeah.
And that was a huge one for me. I rode around in the privacy of my own yard for a lot of rides, where every 2 or 3 strides, I would look down and check my own thigh bones. And it scrambles the brain. It hurts when you're fixing your own habits.
Yeah, it is. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah, because just to make your thigh bones equal, you suddenly feel like you're going to fall off the left or fall off the right because your nervous system just isn't used to it. It's not normal. So because it's not normal, it feels wrong.
That's a good point.
But I go, the bones don't lie.
No, they don't.
Either the bones are symmetrical in the panel, in the flaps of the saddle, or they're not.
Right.
So if
And
we,
unfortunately, we will use muscle tension instead of using our bones. That I think that's really important. I like that you brought up the bones, because if we just get down to thinking about skeletons instead of muscular effort, it's much easier to balance if you're just thinking of balancing your bones.
yes. And actually, I forgot about that. That's one of the things when I work with riders. The first thing I said is, let's look for a standing position rather than sitting on the horse or sitting in the saddle.
Important. Yeah.
I'll also say, can you imagine yourself as a jangly Halloween skeleton that's trying to stabilize in that standing position? Because we can mentally separate our our skeleton, our bones, from our soft tissue. Yes. And ultimately, that's how we get better balance and stability. So to look down at our own thigh bones while we're riding, if we're correcting a habit of crookedness in our own body, oh man, does it feel bad? It feels so wrong.
Say, raw and scary. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes anger will come up. All of this stuff, like, this can't be right. Your brain is just trying to wrap around it, and your central nervous system's going crazy.
I remember being in complete disbelief. Like, that just can't be right. That can't be right. And what's funny is, within about anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, our whole nervous system rewires.
Yeah. And if you think about it, when you get an injury, your body instantly reorganizes itself to function
around that injury. Absolutely.
Around that injury. So we're capable of it.
Yes.
It's
just kind of it's just kind of a like feeling of incredulousness that, you know, you're just like, this just can't be.
This is like, not
this
right.
is just wrong. But you look at your own bones and you go, well, I'm just going to put them there. And you feel crooked at first if we're really overcoming our own habits. But as we play with it, pretty soon we have a switch where if we try to go back to our old habit, we suddenly recognize how crooked we've been in the saddle.
Yes.
Right.
It's kind of like from a few podcasts ago, one of my clients has been told 20, 30, 40 years that she had one leg shorter than the other. You know, it's that ingrained thought of how really difficult it is to change a habit.
And it's a large percentage of riders that I encounter that have been told at some point that they have one short leg and one long leg. And a lot of them will literally ride with different length stirrups to try to adjust the problem.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's sort of a quick answer that some instructors will come up with, is just change the length of the stirrups. And it doesn't really address the balance.
It's like putting a lift in your shoe.
Yeah.
Same
yeah.
thing.
And so I can't tell you the number of riders that have been told they have one short leg, long leg. It's very common to hear a rider tell me that that's what they believe about their own body. And typically those are the people I have drop both stirrups first.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Both stirrups and find the balance over the moving horse. Even if the horse is crooked, we can still find our balance.
Right.
And so, and we have to start with that, because if we go where the horse's imbalance puts us, our body weight and mass just make that problem worse for the horse. They never overcome it. It just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. So we actually have to counterbalance it like we would to keep the kayak upright. We go against the force of the wave, not with it.
Yes. And I think that's the hardest concept. You know, it's almost like it's a new method of thinking.
It's pretty different from how we're trained to ride. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty different.
So changing that thought process around that.
And that's why I bring in the lens of physics and forces of motion, because
Right.
if we look at it through that lens, it suddenly makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
But if we are sort of conditioned through traditional riding lessons, traditional training, it can feel inside out. It can feel backwards. It can feel strange
It's
and
raw.
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
raw.
wrong. Yeah. Yeah. So the whole thing of standing, looking down to make sure the legs are underneath us by not seeing our toes,
Mhm.
that's sort of our front to back balance. Our side to side balance is really looking down at our own upper leg bones, left compared to right, right compared to left. And those are two different dimensions of balance. So getting the front back balance doesn't necessarily mean we're not still crooked left to right.
Exactly.
Right. And if we're crooked left to right, it doesn't mean that we're balanced over our legs or our legs are underneath us. We still might be too far back or too far forward. So we have to think at least in two dimensions
Mm-hmm.
when we ride. So
Yeah.
those are some of the biggest tips. And all of those things, I was always looking for tools because I was riding by myself. I didn't have anybody to videotape me and I had no mirrors. So I go, how do I work on this through the feeling? Or how do I get visual feedback in order to overcome my own ingrained habits?
Mm.
Like that's tough because your brain is lying to you.
All the time.
Like we can be massively one sided, and our brain is like, yep, we're good. We're straight.
This is how we go.
This is how we roll. We are good. And then as soon as you adjust your thighs or your whole body to be more symmetrical visually, your brain screams. It's like, no, 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 wrong, wrong, wrong. Don't do that. That's not normal. Bad, bad, bad. And so we might even have to shift back and forth a couple of times,
Yeah.
but eventually our brain will get on board with the change. But that's the biggest thing we fight when we're changing habits of balance in our own body.
Yeah.
And even front to back, I've had riders who were instructed to sit on their pockets. That's how they learned how to ride. And when I help them into more of a standing position, they feel like they're on the edge of a precipice.
Yes, they
They
do.
feel like they're just about to go over the front end of the horse. So it's that same feeling of not normal that makes our brain scream, this can't be right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And knowing that about ourselves when we're working by ourselves, if we expect that as part of just the normal sort of how our brain deals with change, which is not great, and our brains do not have a better sense of balance than our bodies.
Exactly.
Our brain is happy if our head is just sort of mostly upright, right? And our eyes and ears are balanced. But our body, as we play with our, sort of riding use or our position, or like you said, posture as a activity rather than a
Mm-hmm.
static position, then our body eventually sort of sends signals to our brain that says, hey, this is better because we
Yeah.
feel less muscular tension. We feel more of a spontaneous suppling, especially through our arms and legs and around our joints. And even though it might feel a bit precarious at first, ultimately we feel safer.
Yeah. The central nervous system, it's a calming effect.
Yes. Yes. When our bones are in actually an ideal relationship with gravity,
Mm-hmm.
it does calm our central nervous system, makes us feel safer. And the brain, the brain is like a toddler fighting you the whole. But the good news is that sort of internal argument and really disorienting sensation, it's not going to last longer than about 30 minutes at the most.
Yeah.
And most people, it doesn't last longer than 10 minutes
Yeah.
until we sort of reorient and rewire. So we just have to go through that little bit of discomfort
Yes.
in order to make a change.
Yes.
So I think that's everything I have on my like quick list of tips of
Yeah,
how we
those are
change.
yeah, just remembering to, like you said, ride with your bones, connecting your pelvis to your torso. Those are big.
Yeah. And that this literally is how we sort of hack our nervous system,
Yes.
how we hack the operating system of our body in order to get upgrades or updates or make changes that are more efficient if we just look at it through the lens of mechanics, which is the structure of our body, with the ever present, never goes away physics related to the forces of motion.
Right.
Those are the only things that are truly constant between rider bodies, horse bodies, moving, no matter the saddle, no matter the bridle, no matter the sport, no matter, it's like those are the only constants that we can truly rely on. And so that's what we need to pay attention to.
Yes.
Yeah. Our skeletal alignment to gravity during motion and the little tips or things we can use to hack into that system and make it better is what we do.
Yes. Just be curious and play. There's no right or wrong. It's just constantly questioning.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, Deb, because you helped me, along with many of my most important mentors, that most of my life, the thing that got in my way the most was trying too hard.
Yeah.
And I was told that, oh my God, by great writers and by you when I was working with you on my own body, that sort of even mental effort of, did I get it right?
Oof.
Am I doing it right? Did I get it right? Try this, try that, try that. That energy actually gets in the way. It's sort of louder than being able to hear the natural feedback
You
coming from
can't
our
hear
body.
if that's the talk.
Right.
You can't really hear what's going on if you're thinking the ego's talking or the right and wrong or yeah.
And it was
Can we
such a stumbling block for me. Like, what a horrible
me
loop,
too.
right? I'm in this loop of being told, don't try too hard. And so I try hard not to try hard. It's like I just kept trying harder to be more effort, and it's like, oh my God, how do I get out of that loop?
Yeah.
And the only thing that got me out of that loop was giving my busy brain something to focus on, which is how I sort of figured out, oh, if I look at my thighs, if I try to see my toes, if the saddle's going left or right, like these tips that I've shared today are because I went through them.
Right.
Trying to go, I got to give my brain something to
Something
do.
to do.
Because if I try to do nothing with my brain, it gets worse. I try harder to not try harder.
Right.
And
And that's another habit.
yes, that
Yeah.
was a big habit.
Yeah. We used to say in school, one of my teachers, one of my Alexander teachers, after 4 or 5 hours of being worked on, she said, just go out and forget it. Don't even think about it. Just
Yes.
go about your day. Don't be thinking about it. And that was the best instruction to have, because otherwise you get into that focus. Is this it? Is this it? Is this it? There is no this is it.
No, it's a moving, living
Yeah.
adaptation. Absolutely.
There is no place that you're going
I
to
think one of
stay.
the other things I did, I had some very safe horses to ride and a nice contained area. And part of breaking my habit, especially like the more lessons I did in my life, the more I learned, the more I studied, the harder I tried. What that really did was just make some very strong habits. And the ones I wanted to keep, check the box, great. The ones I wanted to change, oh boy, this is going to be a bit of a job, right? So another thing I had to do for myself was, especially the more competent I became as a rider, I actually had to ride many times as a passenger, so to speak, on my
Yes.
horse. So I had a saddle, or sometimes I did it bareback. I had a bridle or I had something, to ride with, but I would play with sort of just, I don't know where the horse is going to go or what the horse is going to do, which can be done at the walk. If you're kind of bold, you could do it at the trot or canter. But to learn to really just sort of stay in the middle of the movement.
I like that. Yeah, I do
and
that a
not
lot.
be the director. Like when I gave up giving, and for me, it's a bit extreme to do a passenger lesson, but when I gave up steering or controlling speed at all, it just sort of freed me up to think about my own body, my own habits, my own use on a moving horse.
Yes.
So that's
I agree.
it's another way to kind of hack the system and go, wow, if I'm not busy guiding the horse, what am I doing?
What am I doing?
What am I doing? Right. And that also kept my busy little brain happy because I didn't know when the turn was coming. I didn't know when the speed would adjust. And so it was like, wow, my senses were sort of heightened. And I ended up loving it. I go, this is like a Disney ride.
It is fun.
It's like, it's kind of fun because I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it was exciting, even if it was at the walk, it was sort of exciting at first to go, it's up to the horse. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another way. If we're really competent riders and we really trust our horses, that can be a fun exercise.
Yes.
If we're not so confident as riders, that could be terrifying. So I'm not suggesting it for everybody.
Right.
But it can be pretty fun to just go, what's my part in this equation of our relationship?
Yeah, asking the questions instead of being in control. I like that.
Yeah, and it woke up feelings and sensations that I'm sure were always there, but were below the level of my conscious awareness.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I think we could wrap it up with that. I hope you guys enjoyed these sort of ways to hack your riding skills and improve your balance, and that you go out and play with them on the back of your horse. Take any one of the ideas and sort of put it to the test.
And let us know.
Yeah, please do comment. And also, please subscribe, follow, like, share, blah, blah, blah. We really appreciate the Horse Geeks podcast getting moved around. So thank you for joining us. And we will see you next time at the next Horse Geeks podcast.
Bye, everybody.